Queremos ahora sí que establecer un vínculo con ustedes. Hemos tomado registro de su llegada, entonces sabemos quiénes son. Y también a los estudiantes que están haciendo acto de presencia aquí. Quiero decirles que este es un tema nuevo, es el tema de justicia global. Es un tema que además para los que acaban de entrar al programa de Relaciones Internacionales, pues van a tomar el curso de justicia global. Ninguna universidad en el Distrito Federal lo tiene. Parece que sí hay un curso de ese tipo en la Universidad de Guanajuato. Y bueno, pues es una extensión de la teoría cosmopolita. Algunos de ustedes están tomando teorías 2, ¿sí? Entonces esto es una ahora sí que casi una extensión lógica de la teoría para enfrentar problemas ya más prácticos como el de la pobreza, mundial. Entonces, bien, pues tenemos aquí al doctor Luis Cabrera. Es un ciudadano americano de tercera generación ya. Él estudió en la Universidad de Washington. Allí hizo su maestría y su doctorado en ciencia política, pero antes fue periodista, también en un periódico de Seattle, en el estado de Washington. Y pues ahora lleva ya algunos años trabajando en la Universidad de Birmingham, en el Departamento de Ciencia Política y Relaciones Internacionales. Y pues realmente va a estar ahora sí que haciendo presentaciones en distintas partes de la Ciudad de México. Y tenemos el gusto de tenerlo su primer día en México, aquí en la Universidad Iberoamericana. Quiero que le demos una calurosa bienvenida. Bien, pues entonces voy a darle la palabra a él. Voy a estar traduciendo del inglés. Algunos de sus, digamos, de los PowerPoints están en inglés, pero va a haber traducción sobre todo lo que él diga. Entonces, para los que no entienden inglés, tenemos eso. Así que, Luis, adelante.
Thank you all for coming. I will stand because I can't sit and speak at the same time. Many thanks to Professor Mina for having me here, and thanks to all of you for coming. Can I take a quick survey of the crowd? How many of you are undergraduate students, just a show of hands? Okay, how many master's or PhD students? And how many representatives from NGOs do we have here? All right, great. Thanks again for coming. What I want to talk about today is one of those topics where some people say, wow, why do we need to talk about that? The duties of poor people toward other poor people. Don't you think, in fact, I was criticized just recently in a review of my book, where a woman said, you know, when people are starving, you really shouldn't be talking to them about their duties. And my thought was, you know, the problem with that is that it gives us an image of people who don't have very much money.
Luis, we didn't rehearse this part, but you have to say a small portion, and I'll translate it.
Oh,
and
sorry.
We observed all details except that one, sorry.
Okay, so would you like to?
No, I think I have to hear the first portion again.
Okay.
Sorry.
The point is, when
David, are you sure? Is there someone here who doesn't?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah, sorry,
all right.
there's some people that come from on NGOs that.
Okay.
Maybe
Sorry.
if you go into the mic, you can take it out.
okay,
I'm not sure.
I will conform. The point is that when I was studying these sorts of things, when I was thinking about global justice and global citizenship,
cuando estaba estudiando estos temas, pensando acerca de la justicia global y de la ciudadanía global,
I met a lot of people who were very comfortable in their own lives materially. They had enough.
conocí a muchas personas que estaban confortablemente en una situación económica holgada y que knew enough,
Suficiente. They had enough money.
o que
they were
tenían
comfortable.
suficiente dinero para vivir de manera holgada.
And some of these people were activists. They worked for NGOs, helping migrantes, helping other people.
Algunas de estas personas eran activistas ayudando a migrantes y a otras personas en necesidad.
I met many, many more people who did not have quite enough money, and yet they were also helping other people.
También conocí a personas que no tenían muchos recursos, pero ellos también estaban ayudando a otras personas.
So today I would like to speak only about a set of those people, and these are mostly Mexicanos helping migrantes de Centroamérica on the trail north.
En esta ocasión pues hablaré solo de un grupo de personas mexicanas que han estado ayudando a los pobres bajo circunstancias que ellos mismos no tienen muchos recursos para que lleguen a la frontera norte.
So here's the problem that I'm dealing with. Problema es, I don't think it's fair to treat people who don't have much money as simply victims.
Sí, no debemos de... el problema para mí es que debemos de no ver a personas que son pobres como víctimas.
But then, what is fair to ask of people who don't have very much money, who are often working many, many hours, many days per week, just to put food on the table?
¿Qué es lo que es legítimo pedir de personas que no ganan mucho dinero y que tienen que trabajar muchas horas para poder poner comida en la mesa?
Esto es mi respuesta a este punto.
This is my response.
Es el libro de mío. This is where the arguments are.
Ahí es donde están los argumentos.
So what do I try to do in this book? It tries to match core human rights to universal duties.
Lo que trato de hacer en este libro es vincular derechos humanos a deberes.
Vivimos en un mundo donde many, many millions of people still die every year because they're poor, because they can't get medicine, they can't get sufficient food, many other things.
En nuestro mundo muchas personas no tienen suficiente e incluso mueren en condiciones de pobreza y por la pobreza.
So the question is, for the global justice field in general, how can we change that? How can that be changed? How can the system be transformed into one where rights would be reliably protected for all, and rights are simply a stand-in here for people getting what they need in life?
¿Cómo podemos trabajar en el ámbito de justicia global para que las personas tengan lo que necesitan para sobrevivir?
And my core question is, what are you and I and everyone else obligated to do to help make that happen?
Sí, ¿cuáles son nuestras obligaciones, las de ustedes, las mías, para hacer que esto suceda?
Okay. So the claims I'm offering today are that we should acknowledge that even very poor persons have duties toward others in such a framework, in this framework of trying to figure out what we should do for each other. Otherwise, we don't respect their human agency, their ability to be much more than victims.
Tenemos que ver cómo vamos a reconocer nuestra relación con otros seres humanos y qué obligaciones tenemos frente a ellos. De otra forma, solo pues estaremos viéndolos como víctimas.
And believe it or not, very few political theorists, philosophers had thought about this problem.
Aunque ustedes no lo crean, muy pocos teóricos políticos o filósofos han pensado sobre este problema.
One who did think about it, named David Miller, has argued very recently that poor people are obligated to essentially stay home and suffer, stay in their own country, and make it right because they're partially responsible for that poverty. So if you're born into a poor family in a poor region of, let's just say, Honduras, whatever you find yourself, the circumstances you find yourself in, you're responsible for, and you should stay there and try to fix that.
Un teórico que probablemente ustedes conozcan, que se llama David Miller, ha escrito mucho sobre el nacionalismo, ha planteado que pues los pobres deben de quedarse en su país de origen, en su lugar de origen, y aceptar las condiciones en las que viven, y no tratar de alterarlas migrando.
And he's very famous, he teaches at Oxford University, but that seemed a little crazy to me.
Y aunque sea un profesor de Oxford, eso me pareció que un poco fuera de lugar o una locura.
So the alternative I've tried to develop is that even if you're born in a family like that, or like my family was, I have plenty of relatives who are born in poverty in Puerto Rico, just go back, to current generations. And the duties I would say to them are not ones to just sit there and accept responsibility for where you find yourself, but to help your neighbors where you can, and to take other actions to help yourself and your family as well.
Bien, viniendo de una familia de migrantes, también conozco a muchos familiares que están en una situación de necesidad, y por eso también pienso en que debe haber formas en que podamos ayudar a aquellos que necesitan para salir adelante, para mejorar sus condiciones de vida.
So the frame is global citizenship, but what is a global citizen?
Sí, el marco general es ciudadanía global, pero ¿cómo es un ciudadano global?
This gentleman is a global citizen in my frame. Se llama Panduro.
Este señor es un ciudadano global, se llama Panduro.
Es un hombre muy malo. Don't mess with him. He was a coyote for 20 years. Then he got caught too many times, and he knew that he had to find another business. He started he worked a day job, but then he was a volunteer in the desert doing what he's doing here, searching for migrantes on the Mexican side, trying to save people before they died, because when you're walking from Hermosillo or wherever it might be, it's very difficult.
Este hombre fue coyote durante mucho tiempo, un personaje temible, pero fue atrapado por la policía o la migración estadounidense tantas veces que reconoció que tenía que tener un cambio de profesión. Así que lo que hizo fue ahora tratar de ayudar a los mexicanos, a los migrantes en el lado mexicano, porque hay extensiones de desierto muy grandes, yendo de Hermosillo hacia la frontera, donde la gente a veces desfallece o se insola o simplemente necesita ayuda. Ahí es donde Panduro ahora es como un pan de Dios.
It's easy to call him a global citizen because he's a Mexicano helping Centroamericanos in his own country, but he is helping them to stay alive, essentially. We had the last count in Arizona alone, more than 3,000 have died in the desert, migrantes, in the last 15 years.
So, a question, does he help them on the Mexican side or
Yes,
also on
Mexican
the American side?
And I don't know how many have died there, but quite a few also.
Sí, sí. Bien, sí. Lo que ha hecho él es precisamente algo que se necesita mucho porque se estima que han muerto 3,000 migrantes, si no en la parte mexicana, ciertamente en la parte ya donde empieza el estado de Arizona en Estados Unidos. Es una labor importante. La labor de Panduro es mantener a la gente viva mientras que dura su tránsito en la parte del desierto mexicano hacia Arizona.
y hay muchas personas mexicanos, americanos, estadounidenses doing similar work in the desert still, hundreds and hundreds of volunteers.
Sí, el desierto es una zona que convoca a personas de distintas nacionalidades para ayudar a los migrantes y entre ellos, así como hay americanos que a lo mejor no están de acuerdo con la migración, hay americanos que ayudan a los migrantes a sobrevivir en el tramo estadounidense.
And that is simply one way to be a global citizen, reaching across international boundaries.
Esa es una forma de ser ciudadano global, es extendiendo la mano a través de límites internacionales, a través de fronteras a los que necesitan ayuda.
So reaching across in order to help secure or protect those individual rights that would be protected if we had a just global system. So if you can imagine a global system where 18 million people don't die of poverty-related causes every year, that would be a much more just global system.
Lo que hace un ciudadano global es sentar un antecedente de cómo sería que cuidaríamos a los seres humanos en un entorno donde hubiera justicia global. De alguna forma ellos están antecediendo, anticipando los roles que un sistema justo estaría desempeñando. Están ayudando a las personas que necesitan esa ayuda y están actuando casi como si los hubiera comisionado un Estado o un orden internacional más justo, excepto que en este caso es su propia conciencia.
Okay, and this is my particular argument, but I contend that to be a global citizen will also mean helping to put such a system in place, helping to make the transformations necessary.
Si no es solo actuar, ayudando a personas que no son de tu nacionalidad, también lo que hacen los ciudadanos globales es de alguna forma crear una presión, contribuir directamente al establecimiento de un orden global justo.
So here are some examples of people acting as global citizens. These are American citizens in the desert in Arizona looking for Mexicanos, Centroamericanos, others sometimes, who have been separated from their group. The coyote has left them behind because they're too slow. They're at risk of dying.
Sí, estos son americanos que están buscando a personas en necesidad. Esa es la parte del desierto de Arizona, y pues a veces son abandonados por los coyotes y pues ellos los auxilian y los ayudan.
And these are two people from the same group, No Más Muertes, in Nogales, Sonora, and they are Latinos, American citizens, but of Mexican-American descent, who are helping migrants who've been returned. So they give them water, they give them socks, blankets, they help them call the people they need to call.
Ok, esta es la parte del desierto mexicano. Las personas que están establecidas ahí también son ciudadanos globales. En este caso son americanos de origen hispano o latino y están apoyando a los mexicanos a los migrantes con distintos bienes como cobijas, agua, comida.
These are not global citizens.
Estos no son ciudadanos globales.
They are looking for migrants.
Están buscando a migrantes.
Ese hombre es una pistola. They put guns on their hips. They go to the border and they look for migrants so that they can call the Border Patrol and tell them there are migrants trying to cross. You have to come stop this.
Estos hombres usan pistolas, tienen toda una apariencia y estrategia intimidatoria, usan sus binoculares para localizar a migrantes y le avisan a la migración estadounidense dónde están caminando o escondidos.
They came from all over the United States to take part in this volunteer project, and what they would tell me when I interviewed them was, we own this country. We get to say who comes in, who doesn't come in. We do. They don't get to say.
Son ciudadanos normales que están reclutados de distintas partes de Estados Unidos o que fueron reclutados de distintas partes de Estados Unidos y llegaron al desierto a reclamar de alguna forma que no pase más mexicanos, y ellos dicen, esta es nuestra nación, nosotros somos los dueños y no queremos que personas de otros países pasen.
And it's a very common attitude. We own what is ours. We get to determine whether we will give aid to people in other countries. We get to determine whether people from other countries can come in. I would say that to a large extent, it's the baseline attitude, if you will, in the world. This is not the global citizen attitude, this is the national citizen attitude.
Sí, no es una posición poco común, de hecho es la posición promedio, la visión de nacionalismo, es nosotros somos dueños de este país, nosotros decidimos quién entra, decidimos quién sale, y tenemos control sobre este pedazo de tierra, y eso es una posición muy común. Se llama la de ciudadanía nacional.
And if you don't believe me, think of Obama and Romney. How many times did you hear them promise to do things for people in other countries to get elected?
¿Cuántas veces escucharon ustedes ahora que han estado en campaña los candidatos Romney y Obama que debe de dejarse entrar a personas de otra nación a su nación?
I think I'll skip this one. I want to get to the point. So, 3 kinds of global citizen duties.
Hay 3 tipos de deberes ciudadanos de ciudadanía global.
So, one can be contribution.
Una puede ser la contribución,
So, time, energy, your skills, your resources.
en tiempo, energía, tus habilidades, tus recursos,
All those things the priest is always asking us to give.
todas esas cosas que los sacerdotes nos piden contribuir.
And an unusual or maybe a less customary kind of duty are duties of accommodation, which I would say are quite distinct from toleration.
Y otro tipo de deberes, que son deberes como de acoplamiento, de acomodar las necesidades de los demás.
So here's toleration. Your ways are strange to me, but I'm not going to hurt you because of them. I will tolerate your strangeness. That's toleration.
Tolerancia es una forma de acomodarse a los demás. Significa que no comparto tus perspectivas, pero estoy dispuesto a que las expreses, acepto que las sostienes y que tienes derecho a hacerlo.
Accommodation is distinct. It's when one person says, I have a right to this thing, and the other person says, yes, you do, and I will accommodate your right. I will take on the duties that go with that right. It's a very different thing, I would say.
Sí, acomodarse es como ser flexible y entender que si alguien está reclamando un derecho, tú aceptas que lo reclame y aceptas también los deberes hacia ellos.
So we can imagine a kind of accommodation at work in the European Union, which is often my sort of living laboratory for looking at ideas of citizenship across borders.
Podemos de alguna forma can you repeat that part? I think it just escaped.
So I want to set up an example from the European Union of accommodation.
Sí, de alguna forma hay un antecedente importante de lo que es ser flexible y acomodar los deberes de los demás en la historia o en el proceso de formación de la Unión Europea.
So I teach in England, but in my class I have students paying the same fees from Romania, from Poland, from France, from any of 27 other countries.
Eh,
26, sorry.
Sí, todos estos países recientemente integrados a Europa pagan una colegiatura similar a la que pagan los estudiantes ingleses en Inglaterra, donde el profesor enseña sus cursos.
So because they're part of this union, they have rights to be able to go and get the same education that the English students do, and the English students have the same rights in their countries.
De esta manera la Unión Europea garantiza derechos similares y a adquirir una educación como la que se imparte en Inglaterra y al mismo precio, y igualmente permite a los ingleses tomar cursos en otras partes de Europa.
And finally, very briefly, there are institutional advocacy duties to press our governments to do better where rights are concerned, to press the World Trade Organization, the International Monetary Fund, etc., to do better where rights are concerned.
También hay derechos institucionales de defensa y de promoción de los deberes que deben de adoptarse en relación a las personas que tienen necesidad.
So moving toward a better institutional system domestically and then internationally.
Es un proceso, un movimiento hacia la creación de instituciones que de alguna forma integren este nuevo tipo de deberes hacia grupos de población en necesidad.
Okay? So the question then is, how do we allocate duties? How do you distribute duties among people? And this is a very familiar question for any of us who live in a society that has progressive taxation. Carlos Slim is supposed to pay more than we are because he has more. Does he pay more?
Not so. Sí, ¿cómo distribuimos nuestras obligaciones o cómo creamos nuevas obligaciones para poder hacer frente a este nuevo tipo de necesidades nuevas? Lo normal es que exista un sistema de imposición o de grabación de impuestos que sea progresivo, es decir, que los que tienen más ingreso paguen más impuestos, no solo más impuestos en cantidad, sino en proporción a lo que el promedio de la gente paga.
So let's consider a country that has 40% of the absolutely poor people in the world. And these are people who simply don't take in enough food every day to be active. They don't have medicine for the most part. They don't have many, many things.
Pensemos en un país, it's
40%.
like Mexico.
India.
India. No, Mexico also has 40%. Pensemos en un país que tiene 40% de su población en un estado de pobreza donde apenas alcanzan el consumo mínimo de alimentos que necesitan, no tienen dinero para medicina y satisfactores básicos.
It actually has 40% of the very,
Of
very
the
poor
global.
people in the entire world.
Sí, no es 40% de su propia población, tiene el 40% de los pobres del mundo están en India.
So recently, for a project, I was with a group of students in India, so Indian students, but also English students, and we were in in India they call them slum neighborhoods, it's like a colonia.
Sí, estaban como en pues les llamamos aquí ciudades perdidas, con estudiantes de la India, and from where else?
And English.
Y estudiantes ingleses.
And we saw people living in these conditions, of course, so no running water, no sewage, lots of problems, living about as poor as you can live these days.
Sí, vimos las condiciones en las que vivían, nada de agua corriente, muchas carencias en sus viviendas y un ambiente pues muy deteriorado. Estuvimos con estos estudiantes ingleses y indios observando esta condición.
But as the people who work with people facing deprivations here, the NGO
Necesidad, es difícil verlos como víctimas.
and this is a lesson I have learned over and over again whenever I talk to people facing these multiple deprivations.
Y esa misma perspectiva de que no son víctimas es la que he podido ir adquiriendo cuando hablo con estas personas en condiciones de extrema pobreza.
So in fact, they gave me this frame. I didn't impose it on them.
De hecho, ellos me hicieron no verlos como víctimas, yo no lo impuse en ellos.
So what can you do when you're very, very poor, you don't have enough to eat? One of the things you can do is avoiding harming others. And that's sometimes harder than it sounds when your neighbors have more than you, etc. We all know that, but that's one of the very basic duties that makes community possible. And it's one of our most important set of duties. They're called negative duties. You simply avoid harming others. You don't take their things if you can avoid it. You don't hurt them if you can avoid it.
Sí, una persona pobre con muchas carencias, de todas maneras está asumiendo una obligación fundamental que es la de no hacer daños a otros, no hacer daño a otros. Y eso es admirable en el sentido de que pues el entorno en el que viven no necesariamente es conducente a que observen ese deber.
But there are also positive duties, and these are duties to help protect others who you don't have any relationship with. You're not related to them as family, you don't have a contract, you're not a police officer getting paid to protect them, they're just other people.
Pero no solamente asumen este deber negativo que se le llama cuando simplemente uno se abstiene de hacer daño a los demás o abstiene de hacer algo a los otros, también asumen derechos positivos, es decir, hacer cosas que contribuyan al bien de otras personas.
And these are actually more controversial duties, so I'll give you an example of one that we talk about in my global ethics class.
Ciertamente hay una gran variedad de derechos positivos y en general estas, no de derechos, de obligaciones positivas y en general estas son controversiales, pero permítanme hablar sobre algunas que he estado considerando en mi curso de ética global.
So there are literally tens of thousands of very good charities in the world, very good NGOs.
Hay decenas de miles de organizaciones filantrópicas y de beneficencia y ONGs en el mundo.
One of them works on intestinal worms in children. It's not pretty, but it's important.
Una de ellas, su especialidad es que trabaja en lombrices intestinales en niños.
And for about, let me see, 1 peso, you can cure a child who has these worms. And with these worms, eventually it will kill them.
Con un peso mexicano, right? Con un peso mexicano puedes curar a un niño que tenga esta enfermedad y efectivamente dejarlo libre de estas lombrices intestinales.
All of us, if we have money to spend, if we could spare a few pesos, would have positive duties to share that with these children. So if we were going to spend it on coffee today, on cerveza with our friends, whatever it might be, money that we don't need, we could take some of that and give it, and it would be said we have a positive duty to these kids. They're in Africa, we have no connection, it's a positive duty.
Si asumiéramos una obligación positiva de esta índole, o si reconociéramos que tenemos obligaciones positivas, entonces utilizaríamos algunos de nuestros pesos en lugar de gastarlos en el antro para dárselos a personas que están en África sufriendo esta enfermedad.
So this is the controversial duty. This is where the reviewer for my book says, how can you tell incredibly poor people that they have positive duties?
Es en vista de este tipo de razonamiento de obligaciones positivas que el dictaminador no es dictaminador, es reseñador del libro de la práctica de la ciudadanía global del doctor critica y dice, ¿cómo puedes asumir que personas pobres tienen obligaciones positivas?
So let's start with people who are not so poor, but who don't have a lot of money. So my personal hero, a nun, Sister Alma, she was in Coatzacoalcos. She ran a migrant shelter there.
Veamos un caso de una persona que no es pobre, pero tampoco tiene recursos abundantes, que es la hermana Alma, que trabaja en un refugio en Coatzacoalcos.
So she would, with the other people from the church, knock on the doors of Mexicanos, middle-class Mexicanos, people with some money, but not a lot of money in Coatzacoalcos.
Ella tocaría las puertas junto con otras personas de la iglesia en hogares de clase media que pues tampoco están con dinero en abundancia, to ask for contributions.
Yes,
para pedir contribuciones para un refugio, algo que hemos estado haciendo aquí recientemente.
As many of you I'm sure know, the Catholic Church has a string of migrant shelters serving mostly Centroamericanos, about 25 of them now, all the way up to Mexico.
Como ustedes han de saber, la Iglesia Católica tiene una gran cantidad de refugios ubicados a lo largo del trayecto que lleva a la frontera norte, que se dedican fundamentalmente a atender a migrantes centroamericanos.
And these are people who don't have very much, helping people who have much less.
Y este es un típico caso de personas que no tienen mucho, que están ayudando a personas que tienen menos.
The train riders, and as you probably know better than I do, this is one of the most difficult journeys in the world today if you're a migrant.
Viajar en tren en la forma que viajan los migrantes es uno de los trayectos más peligrosos y más cansados y agotadores que existen.
And when I was talking to them, it was before the narcotraficantes were using them, for their own purposes. So it's gotten even worse.
Y esto sucedió ese trayecto se volvió todavía más peligroso y problemático desde que el narcotráfico comenzó a querer intervenir y aprovecharse de la condición de los migrantes.
Okay, so just a representative quote from somebody who's knocking on the door.
Esta es una cita representativa de alguien que toca la puerta. Is it
Oh,
there?
it's good.
Okay. Miguel Ángel, si tocas por suficiente tiempo te van a dar, o si les das guerra. Si no dan de corazón, entonces darán porque tú los estás haciendo enojarse.
So those are people who don't have a lot, helping people who have very little. What about the people who have very little? Well, around the world, again, I'm taught the same lessons by these people making very, very difficult journeys. These guys are from Bangladesh, and they have flown to Mali in North Africa.
Estas personas son de Bangladesh y de Bengala, se le llama también, y han volado a África del Norte.
And they all walked across the Sahara Desert.
Y todos atraviesan el desierto del Sahara.
To jump the fence into this little piece of Spain that's still connected to Morocco from colonial times.
Para llegar a saltarse la reja de esta pequeña parte de Melilla,
Ceuta y Melilla.
Ceuta, para llegar a esta pequeña porción de tierra que es territorio español.
And eventually Spain will release them into the mainland, so they won.
Y eventualmente España ya los dejará, ya es posible para ellos llegar a distintas partes de España.
But they also lost because each one of them had stories to tell about seeing friends die on the way, crossing, probably the world's most dangerous desert.
Pero ellos también tienen historias tristes que contar en términos de las personas que dejaron atrás en el desierto del Sahara, que es uno de los más difíciles de cruzar.
But they also talked about protecting each other, sharing water, keeping each other safe. They were discharging positive duties, a political theorist would say.
Pero también estos que tienen poco asumen obligaciones positivas en la medida que comparten su agua, se cuidan mutuamente en ese trayecto del desierto y comparten lo poco que tienen para sobrevivir juntos.
Okay, that's one view of the duties the poor can and do take on, the very poorest in the world. Here's another view from 1968. Paul Ehrlich, famous sociologist.
Esta es una perspectiva de derechos, de obligaciones positivas que asumen personas que tienen muy poco. Ahora les voy a dar otra perspectiva.
So, the world is overcrowded. Overpopulation means the poor are like a cancer in the world. That's what he's saying.
What was the name of the author?
Paul Ehrlich.
Paul Ehrlich es alguien que dice que el mundo está sobrepoblado y que los pobres son como una mancha, o was it a stain?
Cancer.
A cáncer, como un cáncer en las naciones. Pues.
So, the duties of the poor are to suffer and die, essentially.
En esa medida, las obligaciones positivas de los pobres es morir, conformarse, resignarse a morir.
Not very satisfying and not very common these days.
No, algo que no es muy satisfactorio ni común en estos días.
Two other views. One I want to focus on.
Otras dos perspectivas en las que quiero enfocarme.
So this is David Miller again. Those in poor countries can be held collectively responsible for their own poverty. Like families, we are nations, we inherit responsibility for our own poverty.
Bueno, otra vez la perspectiva de Miller, es decir, pues que de alguna forma los miembros de un país o los mismos pobres son colectivamente responsables de la condición en la que están.
The problem there, I think, is the children. I don't think he can probably be held collectively responsible for being born. It's a problematic view, I think.
Si esa es la perspectiva que sostiene, entonces será congruente sostener que los niños pobres son responsables de su pobreza colectivamente.
So the view I'm offering would see a big role for people living in conditions like this, which are very common in India and many other places around the world, because they live among the most needy. They are among the most needy. Their contributions are especially important. They know the needs. They know how to help. They know the help that is needed.
Who knows the help?
The people themselves. So
Ajá,
people like
sí.
this mother.
Las personas dentro de estas comunidades muy pobres saben el tipo de necesidades que tienen y hacen lo posible por cubrirlas con lo que tienen.
So working with organizations, they can help build up their communities.
Pero si prestan sus servicios, si ayudan, si apoyan, si colaboran con ONGs internacionales dedicadas a ayudar a los pobres, entonces pueden hacer mucho por esas comunidades, porque saben precisamente las áreas de necesidad que tienen.
And I want to close with a question for all of you, because I don't know, every Mexican family I know has at least one relative they've sent north, right? Somebody living in the States, living somewhere else. Does anyone in here not have any relatives living in the United States? No cousins? Where are you from?
I'm from Germany.
How many people have a relative living in the United States? Okay. And how many of your relatives dutifully send money back home to their mother or father? Just one? They're supposed to. They're supposed to send the money back. Here's the question. And I'm not saying we're relatively poor. I have, again, my family's from Puerto Rico on my father's side, and we've sent everybody to the United States as far as I can tell. Are there special obligations if you're born poor? So, for example, if you're born into a family, let's say, in Chiapas,
La cuestión es, ¿tenemos algún tipo de obligación? ¿Qué pasa si, por ejemplo, nacemos en Chiapas?
do you have an obligation to join the migrant trail and try to make things better for your relatives?
Si además tienes is this in the case they have someone living in the U.S. or just someone that is passing by Chiapas?
Someone born in Chiapas, do you have an obligation to try to get into the United States, without permission, to try to get a good job, send money back home, that sort of thing?
Sí, perdón, estaba medio complicada la idea. La cuestión es, si tú naces en Chiapas, tienes una obligación contigo mismo de ir a los Estados Unidos a tener un trabajo mejor pagado y entonces a mandar dinero a tu casa. ¿Tienes esa obligación?
Mandar dinero, sí. Pero to join the migrant trail, I would say no. I'm going to show you a very difficult picture.
Sí, quizá sí tengas la obligación de hacer algo por ti, obteniendo un mejor ingreso en Estados Unidos, pero no necesariamente de caminar el arduo camino que llevan los migrantes desde Chiapas hasta los Estados Unidos.
So the point is, the duties of people born into poor families don't extend to trying to make this dangerous journey.
Sí, los deberes de las personas de tratar de ayudar a su familia, de conseguir dinero para ellos, no entrañan la obligación de irse en esta ruta peligrosa hacia Estados Unidos.
And this is why.
Y esto es por qué.
So, the conclusion would be that académicos must view even the very poorest persons in the world as agents, moral agents, capable of helping their neighbors and their communities.
Es importante especialmente que los académicos asumamos la perspectiva de que estas personas en necesidad son agentes que tienen un centro moral para decidir por su propia vida.
And of course, policymakers and all of us have an obligation to include the voices of the very poorest persons in our public discourse.
También los que hacen las políticas públicas y nosotros mismos tenemos la obligación de procurar que estas personas pobres expresen sus puntos de vista en el discurso público.
Okay. And I know that's a very narrow topic, but if you have other general questions about global justice or global citizenship, etc., I'm happy to take them.
Estoy dispuesto a que hagan las preguntas que deseen hacer sobre cualquier punto que les haya interesado en la plática y del tema.
That Minuteman group trying to keep migrants out, and their email traffic was simply horrified. They had no idea the migrant trail was so difficult.
Fueron paradójicamente los hombres estos llamados Minuteman, que son los que ayudan a la migración para que atrapen a los migrantes en el territorio estadounidense, los que encontraron el cuerpo. Discúlpense que no es muy justo presentarles esta fotografía, pero que una vez que entró en las redes sociales, en los emails, tuvo un tráfico enorme.
Vengo de la fundación Nuestros Niños Ahora IAP. Nosotros atendemos niños de familias de escasos recursos.
I come from the Fundación Niños what?
Nuestros Niños
Nuestros
Ahora
Niños Ahora. Our children today.
es una institución de asistencia privada.
No, en
IAP. Nosotros les brindamos alimento, les brindamos educación. Los niños los lleva su mamá, los recoge su mamá y tiene todo el tiempo para trabajar. Pero muchas veces yo siento, tengo 27 años trabajando en esto. Sí,
Sí.
ya está, ¿no? Sí, comprenden
A ver.
más español que
It's a
habla, ¿no?
daycare center for poor mothers. So they leave their children there. She and her staff look after the kids throughout the day, and then mothers come and pick them up.
Ajá. En los 27 años que tengo trabajando ahí, he llegado a la conclusión, a la sensación de que en vez de ser una obligación de los papás colaborar para mejorar para mejorar su situación, es al revés. Diciendo, es que ustedes tienen obligación de ayudarnos. Ustedes tienen que hacerlo.
Lo que dice usted es que después de 27 años de estar trabajando ahí,
Yo tengo ya esa idea.
sí, usted la idea que tiene es no que los padres tienen la obligación de contribuir con usted, sino que usted tiene la obligación de contribuir con los padres al cuidado.
Ellos
Que
tienen
ellos-
esa idea.
Ellos tienen esa idea.
Las mamás
Ok.
dicen, yo no tengo ninguna obligación. Ustedes que tienen, o consigan, porque nosotros no tenemos. Consigan para ayudarnos, porque nosotros no tenemos.
Okay, what she has perceived after 27 years of working in this place is that in this organization is that somehow the people that are that benefit, let's say the mothers, the parents of the kids that are left in this daycare center, feel that that somehow she and the members of her organization have the obligation to help them in this.
Y entonces, ¿dónde están las obligaciones de los pobres? ¿Cómo se logra llegar a hacerles la idea, a meterles esa idea de decir, bueno, estamos ayudando, pero ustedes también tienen obligaciones, tienen que solidarizarse, tienen que trabajar, por lo menos ver que mejoren, no que se queden en
So then the tables are turned, and she wonders whether poor people can acknowledge their own obligations to improve their condition or toward these benefits they are receiving.
What do you think they would say if you asked them to donate just a little bit of time every week to make it a cooperative nursery? Do you think they would do 2 or 3 hours?
Sí, ¿qué pensaría usted si les dijera, cómo vería usted la idea de pedirles a ellos que contribuyan con algo de trabajo por unas cuantas horas en la semana? Que usted comenzara a decirles, ¿por qué no ayuda usted también en esto? ¿Por qué no contribuye con algo de su tiempo, con 1 hora y media, 2 horas?
Porque tienen una pequeña cuota simbólica que pagan por el servicio.
Ajá.
Yo estoy con-
Okay.
Además,
They pay a little bit, so she is all right with what they pay.
además yo trabajo, ellas trabajan en lo que sea, en la calle, vendiendo, en los cruceros, en muchos lados, y dice, yo trabajo, yo no puedo colaborar.
Well, they contribute with some money to the daycare center, so she thinks that's the part there's their contribution. As for giving time, that's the really scarce resource for them.
It's a difficult and dangerous question.
Esa es una pregunta difícil y peligrosa.
Así es.
If you go too far one way, then you sound like Mitt Romney blaming the poor.
Sí, sí, se va mucho a un extremo, llega al, digamos, a la región peligrosa de culpar a los pobres por ser pobres. A la Mitt Romney.
No, porque
too far the other
están
way.
trabajando.
Yeah.
Si se va al otro lado, sí.
Well, too far the other way, and people aren't partners with us in their own community development, let us say. So I know every organization faces this challenge.
Sí, si se va al otro lado, entonces también resulta que las personas que reciben beneficio luego no actúan como socios en el mismo proyecto con usted.
Así es.
I sympathize and I hope to learn from cases like yours.
Sí, simpatizo con lo que me dice y espero poder aprender de lo que está compartiendo.
Ah, muy bien. Y yo lo felicito por el tema tan interesante que tenemos en la frontera, ¿no? Para mí son altas matemáticas, ligas mayores.
That's
Gracias.
highly.
Okay. My question is that if you think that also part of the problem is that these people actually perceive themselves as victims, like, do you think public discourse and media actually encourage them to think of themselves as victims as well?
Again, I would almost have to give the same answer, Mitt Romney on one side, people's attitudes on the others. I think that's probably a language we would want to avoid at this point.
Yeah, well, she asked in English.
Okay,
Okay. En lo que está diciendo, ¿cuál es tu nombre?
Alejandra.
Alejandra, es que de alguna forma los medios contribuyen a la que la gente se perciba como víctima. Entonces, ¿qué es lo que cuestionas ante esta situación?
O sea, sí, de que sí también, o sea, que sí parte del problema del discurso es ese, ¿no? El que la gente también, o sea, que cómo vas a llegar a una justicia si la gente misma, la gente pobre se percibe a sí misma, o sea, ayudado por
Los medios,
por los
sí.
medios.
Sí, ayudado por los medios, la gente se percibe como víctima. ¿Cómo puedes moverte hacia la parte de justicia si no sales como de una especie de círculo vicioso? Que más víctima, menos haces por ti mismo.
But I think you hit at the core of an issue that the best organizations, the best development organizations have been working with, which is how to help people become partners in their own community development.
Sí, ciertamente tocas un punto central en lo que son las preocupaciones de grandes organizaciones que tratan de ayudar a las personas pobres, que es cómo se integra a los beneficiarios de todas estas políticas como colaboradores y socios dentro de un mismo proceso en el que ellos están mejorando sus condiciones.
Are there NGO representatives who might want to talk about their experiences with this?
Sí, otras personas que estén en ONGs que quisieran dar su opinión sobre este tipo de asuntos.
We work at a Latin American organization that's called Techo. We work with families living in extreme poverty in slums. And what you're saying is pretty much how we work, making the people the center of all of our projects. They are the ones that decide whether or not to work with us, whether or not to participate, whether or not to develop any kind of project. And our role is only to, walk with them and to give them all the tools or the capacities or the training, if necessary, to develop all the projects. My question would be, when we work with the people that you mentioned, these global citizens, normally are the community leaders that we work with, because they are the ones that motivate the rest of the community. What is sometimes difficult is how how can this be sustainable in time, you know, because sometimes people can be motivated, you know, and you give them the speech, you know, you can be, you can get out of this condition if you work, if you organize it yourselves, if you work for your community, a lot of things can happen. But with all what she was saying, that, you know, the media and everyone is telling them all the opposite, you know, you're victims, if you're born poor, you're going to die poor. How do you think that us and as NGOs can make this this change in their minds sustainable when they don't really see a direct impact in their lives? Like, they don't see, you know, like from one day to another, or even in a year, like the biggest change in their lives. And sometimes they get disappointed, you know, they say, okay, I believed that I was, you know, the key to changing my own life and my communities, and I work and I work and I work, and then, you know, things don't happen, and then I get, you know, like, the motivation just like fades away. What do you think it's our role as NGOs once we actually put, you know, the idea, and they bought it, that they have to work and they have to become these kinds of citizens, and after a while they don't see any change, and they're probably just thinking, I was probably better off before this, and better off thinking that I was poor and I was going to die poor. And what do you think our role as NGOs should be?
I think it'd probably be nice if the government would help a little more. So, if you think about it, it's an incredibly difficult task that NGOs take on for themselves with the communities they work with. Because you go in and you've got to develop the model, you've got to get buy-in from the community, and then you've got to sustain it against burnout, which is always the fear, you know, always the danger. At some point, the state has to step in. And I'm going to say something strange, but taxes are part of the answer. I said it, taxes, more taxes. In fact, part of the answer all over the world. One of the problems that still faces middle-income countries like Mexico, increasingly like India, which is almost middle income, is that tax revenue, tax collection is actually very low. The government is starved for resources. Now, part of that is because the big rich people, whose names we all know, don't pay enough, right? Another part is because maybe very comfortable middle-class people could pay a little more. I know that's not a popular thing to say, but sustainable development of the kind you're talking about is almost always supported by the state in the end. You know, who's building the roads, who's putting in the sewers, the electricity. You know, to ask an NGO to take care of the very basic things on an ongoing basis is a big ask.
Sí, lo que planteaba el compañero es que de alguna forma, en principio, uno quiere ayudar a las comunidades y necesita levantar su moral y necesita hacerles creer que pueden cambiar su condición, pero que de alguna forma no necesariamente esta tarea es sostenible, y tampoco el ánimo de las personas. Entonces, el profesor Cabrera se refería a esto como burnout, así como que se cansan de estar esperando un cambio o de estar procurando un cambio y que no ocurra en un lapso de tiempo razonable. No solamente las personas, sino también los que están ayudando. Entonces, ¿cómo podría hacerse sostenible? Es lo que pregunta. Lo que contesta el doctor Cabrera es definitivamente no lo pueden hacer solos, y es demasiado pedirle a una ONG que esté haciendo esto, no solamente tratando de apoyar el cambio, sino también tener que mantener el ánimo a lo largo de momentos prolongados. Entonces, lo que dice el profesor Cabrera es, el Estado tiene que entrar a ayudar, porque, o sea, no pueden estar solas las ONGs haciendo lo que hacen, y que para eso se necesita que efectivamente haya más grabación, recolección de impuestos, y que efectivamente los que ganan más paguen más, y incluso las clases medias todavía pongan otro poco más para que puedan hacerse los cambios en la vida de estas personas, que de alguna forma mantengan y hagan sostenible este ánimo de que es posible cambiar si uno coopera y si uno trabaja fuerte por ello, ¿no?
And this is where those duties of pressing institutions come in. I mean, we all know about this, but we all can get better. I'm part of an organization called Academics Stand Against Poverty, and one of the big efforts for this group is to help academics get better at pressing all of our governments for policy changes. And it's becoming a global network, and we're beginning a project specifically aimed at finding people who are really good at this and helping the rest of us get good at it, because that's one more piece we can add.
Pues como mencionaba el profesor hace rato, hay como una obligación de presionar a las instituciones a que tomen medidas para resolver este tipo de problemas, que una parte es nuestra contribución en trabajo, como lo hacen los de Techo, otra parte es nuestra contribución en dinero y otra parte es hacer escándalo y hacer presión para que el gobierno escuche y actúe. Es la otra tarea que tiene que ver con promover el cambio. Y el profesor mismo está en una organización que se llama Académicos contra la Pobreza, y realmente hay personas que pueden hacer este trabajo en términos de publicitar las necesidades, de efectivamente llegar a las personas que tienen los recursos para que entiendan la necesidad de dar contribuciones más fuertes, de estar dispuestos a pagar más impuestos, etcétera. Hay una serie de presiones que se ejercen en esta tarea, pues que es como de una defensoría proactiva en términos de generar un cambio en la percepción de los problemas.
Well, thanks for the answer. She had a question of what was the government's role in all of this, and you answered it along with mine. Apart from this, that we have a focus on the communities, and for them to be aware that they are part of the solution, not only the problem, but part of the solution. We know that this takes all of society to work for a solution, from academics to government to society in general. What we were talking yesterday was that it's easy, well, not easy, but it's obvious sometimes, with someone living in poverty, for them to work for overcoming that condition, because they are the ones that are suffering, they feel it, they live it day by day. How would you say, or any recommendations or advice from all of your experience, how do you make this problem a problem for people that don't suffer this condition? Because poverty is a problem for people that are poor. It's a problem for us, but on a day-to-day basis, we go to our houses to sleep and to eat, and we're not living in that condition, and we're not the majority of people that are concerned about this problem. We're actually a minority, that people that are not living in poverty and care and are worried and are occupied trying to solve it. So your advice on including, academics, government, and society in general, talking about a thing like poverty, what would you be your advice? How do we make it a problem for, or how do we make people that are not poor as concerned as if they were poor, or if it was affecting the rest of their families?
Okay, keep it simple. Sabes que trabaja la democracia. And I'm sorry for my terrible Spanish. I've been taking Spanish classes since I was this tall. It's a beautiful language, and before I'm 50, I will come back and speak to you all fluently. Democracy works because it's inconvenient. That's what I think. After studying it very long and very hard, it inconveniences power. It's impolite. It gives you the ability to say to the face of very powerful people, "You're wrong, and I'm going to make it very uncomfortable for you." That's, unfortunately, usually the way real change happens in societies, and it takes a long time.
Sí, bien, la pregunta es cómo hacemos que los que no son pobres se preocupen por la pobreza. ¿Cómo hacemos que de alguna forma sientan lo que eso es, como para que actúen de una manera más decidida para contribuir a resolverla? La respuesta que da el profesor es que, pues, la democracia tiene la virtud de generar una incomodidad en las clases pudientes o en el gobierno, que permite efectivamente que se diga claramente y que se hable claramente al gobierno y se le diga: estás haciendo las cosas mal, tienes que cambiar tu curso de acción. Así que en este proceso, pues, recurrir a los medios que nos da la democracia para generar un cambio de actitud o para generar conciencia es parte de los recursos que tenemos para resolver este problema. César?
My name is Cesar Villanueva. A couple of things. First, congratulate David for the great efforts he's made to have you here. I know he was very, very excited from weeks before. He told everyone about this, and we were also happy. I also want to briefly tell you that I'm a graduate from the University of Washington. So I know you studied there. So we are Huskies. Another thing is some of my students were actually hitting at the issue of cosmopolitanism, ethics, global citizenship in our IR course at the moment. And something that we're discussing is the role of education on this. How do we make education create cosmopolitan minds, people concerned about their reality, their immediate reality and beyond? So in one of the pieces they just read today, for today to come here, there was an idea that part of the inequalities in understanding the global citizenship is that education does not really teach these issues as something relevant for high school, junior high. If you are lucky, you get these topics when you are at university, but you are not really. This is not something that is ingrained in the core education that every person should have, no matter what. So, what is your idea about that?
This, I devoted a chapter to my book, of my book, to this very important idea. But Martha Nussbaum is really the guru of this idea, and it's actually a global movement to do exactly what you're saying, which is put global citizenship in the core curriculum. Because what are we? We're national citizens. That's the world we live in. They might need us to go fight in a war if we're young enough. They need us to pay taxes. They need us to love our country so that we'll make sacrifices for our country when we're called on to do so. The world doesn't have that yet. There's no world government that needs to train us to be global citizens. However, there are very effective, I would say, movements to incorporate this in the curriculum. In Britain, where my children refuse to leave now, I never get to go back to the United States, and they come home, and every week it seems like they've learned about a different part of the world. And this is an explicit effort to train them to be global citizens. This is a bunch of people at my university and some others who were in education and got together and said, we need exactly what you're saying. And we're going to develop a curriculum, we're going to take it to the government, and we're going to keep knocking until they say, yes, you can train every school child this way. So now, in Britain, they get this national education, but they also get a bit of global education as well. And I think that's what it takes, movement, pressing, developing materials they can use. So, but I would say this, though, the first step is the one you all are taking. Here you are on a Tuesday. You could be in the pub. My students are in the pub. But you're here because you're interested in some of these ideas. And the more we talk about these ideas, the better we get at refining these ideas, right? Maybe you're here because you were told to be here. But I know that with my students, when we start out in week 1, we start with Peter Singer. who basically tells you you have to give everything away that you don't absolutely need to people who need it more. And they all completely reject that. They say, no way, you're crazy. I'm out of here. I'm never taking this class again. And they come back. By the end of the second term, Peter Singer doesn't seem so crazy to them. None of them give all their stuff away. Nobody ever does that. Even he doesn't do that. But they have worked with the ideas so much that it's becoming second nature for them to think about other people in other countries having rights that are the same as theirs or having other standing. So I think what you're doing is what we all need to do all over the world, raise these questions.
Bien, la pregunta que plantea el profesor César Villanueva es cómo es que de alguna forma en su curso de teorías de RI2 en el tema de cosmopolitismo surgió la idea de por qué no está de alguna forma enclavado en nuestra educación desde primaria hasta preparatoria, y algo extraño, ¿verdad? Porque somos un país de gente pobre, pero la pobreza no recuerdo en mi libro de texto gratuito que jamás viniera algo al respecto de que debemos de ayudar a los pobres. Entonces es como que es un tema que no está suficientemente enfatizado en nuestra educación. Entonces, ¿qué opinaba el doctor Cabrera sobre presionar para que el tema de la pobreza, y de la pobreza no solo de los locales, sino de los distantes también, esté en la educación? Y pues bueno, lo que contesta es que efectivamente estamos como que a los estados se les hace fácil inculcarnos muchas cosas, que debemos defender al país, que debemos pagar impuestos, que debemos ayudar a nuestras propias connacionales y distintos deberes que nos asigna, pero no necesariamente fluye de este Estado nacional esta preocupación por pobres distantes y a veces ni siquiera por pobres locales, ¿no? Entonces que de alguna forma en Gran Bretaña ya ha habido bastante presión por parte de grupos para que se incluya el tema de la pobreza en la educación primaria, secundaria y preparatoria, que sea una cosa que los estudiantes puedan ver y concientizarse de ella, y que esto es algo relativamente reciente.
Congrats, I really enjoyed this. I had no idea that, I must confess I haven't read your work before, so I had no idea how close it was to mine. But one of the things I like very much about your arguments and the way it works is this focus on the idea of citizenship as collective responsibility, and sort of taking the pressure and the emphasis off the idea of citizenship as a rights-based concept or a rights-based understanding of this is what I have to protect against others. And it kind of keys into a lot of work I've been doing lately about this, or about the conflict, competition, competitive relationship between citizenship rights and human rights. You start off with a similar kind of problematic in terms of, how can we encourage or promote better human rights enforcement, because in many cases human rights enforcement at the moment is really quite dire. And as we're seeing in the US, recent immigration bubbles, that human rights at the start were considered they were supposed to undercut the state. If the state fails in its duties to you, then human rights are supposed to kick in. But of course, the minute the state fails in its rights to you, human rights also disappear as well. And this was something that was experienced by the stateless in the interwar period in Europe. Human rights are supposed to be there, but they evaporate the minute they're needed. So my question is, and it's one that's been perplexing me, and I'm just wondering if you actually are feeling a bit more positive about the whole idea of global citizenship than I am. Basic point, human rights not really working very well, or they're dysfunctional. Because they require the state system, even at the same time they're supposed to undercut it. Citizenship rights, on the other hand, especially in Europe at the moment, there's a reinforcement of the idea of national citizenship rights and values as opposed to at least regional ones. Citizenship rights are. So do you think conceptions of global citizenship, whether you want to include yours in that, I don't know, do you think they are supposed to be a replacement for dysfunctional human rights? In stimulating this cross-border collective responsibility that human rights is supposed to, because we're, it's supposed to focus on those goals.
I'm always a less nuanced thinker than you would think. So actually, what I would say is that global citizenship and human rights are like this, and the aim is to get human rights better secured. Now, Europe, and I've got a question for all of you in a moment. I want to know about NAFTA and whether we should make NAFTA more like the European Union. But Europe is one place in the world where you can go to a court above your state and say, my human rights have been violated, what are you going to do about it? And it's not perfect, but it's at least there. It gives us an alternate model.
But the UN Declaration of Human Rights doesn't define the understanding of national citizenship in relation to human rights.
It was a
and
good
this
start.
is kind of the problem.
Yeah.
So,
no, the UN Declaration was written by states. It was what they were willing to give. It was a good start.
sovereignty gets in the way.
Yeah, I would agree. But can I ask a question of all of you, especially the young folks? I live in a place where if I feel like the planes are flying too close to my house, or if I feel like the police are spying on me in ways that they shouldn't, and my government, my British government, that's where I pay taxes, won't do anything about it, I can go to the European Court of Human Rights and file a complaint. And if it's important enough, they'll see it. Can you possibly envision a NAFTA that would work like that? Or would it be a good thing? Or would you just say, no, NAFTA, please? No. So I'm looking at this side because you look like undergraduate students to me. Bright, shining, intelligent faces.
Well, in my opinion, the question is...
You're a European citizen
I'm
already.
a German one. I see the problem with the centralized authorities because what will you do when your own state is able to provide rights better for you than a subordinated authority which is operating globally? What if the European Court denies you some basic right which would be granted by you by your own country? And that's leading me to the question, why see problems so globally? Why shouldn't we think about problems which are sometimes partially caused by global influences, but see them more regionally? Because people usually tend to feel more responsible for each other when they are connected by geographically, culturally, and so on.
When somebody starves to death in the 27 member countries of the European Union, it's on the front page of every newspaper. We had a child starve to death in Birmingham because of neglect, and it was on the front page. It's been the subject of investigations in Parliament. It's a big, big deal. That happens, thousands and thousands of times a day in other parts of the world. The problem with only thinking regionally is that then we would have no means of ensuring that our duties to the rest of the world are discharged. So if Europe only took care of Europe, that would be good for Europe. But what about the rest of the world that could use Europe's expertise, whatever Europe might have to offer? That would be the problem. NAFTA, Mexicanos? Wait, another non-Mexican?
No, I'm Mexican.
My apologies.
It's okay. No, I think we don't even have that in Mexico. I mean, I don't think we will trust our authorities to go and say like, oh, we think there's a lot of noise here. Like, I don't think we have that relation, citizen government. So like, thinking about it as NAFTA, I think we don't even have it like locally, in the domestic level. I can't envision. Maybe it's possible, but I can't envision it like right now.
But there's the Corte Interamericana, and some complaints have been taken there, and then they have had to rule against a decision taken previously in favor of some people shot in Guerrero, I think. So we already have some kind of supranational court in the whole continent, where once the Corte Interamericana rules in favor of some grieved person here in Mexico, then the government has to abide. So we know about that, and that some problems have been resolved in that way. But perhaps I'm not sure how much. I would like to ask the students. Did you ever think that NAFTA could evolve into something like the European Union, or you just simply didn't even cross your mind?
No, never.
No, that's just for business, and that's it.
It's not unusual that it wouldn't cross your mind. There are only a few academics, economists, philosophers talking about reasons to make NAFTA look more like the European Union. I think you'll hear more about that over, when you're my age, when you have grandchildren. It'll be a lot more in the public discourse. Right now, it's a very young thing. But let me just put this in your head so that 50 years from now, when they are having this argument, you'll think about that. Oh, yeah. Turkey is a country that's in a lot of ways like Mexico. It's almost exactly the same income profile. It's got something a little different than Mexico in that it's got a population of Kurdish people. And many Turks don't accept the Kurds as Turks. They're this sort of nationality that's split between three different countries, and they always have problems. There are some separatists, but basically the Kurds have often been mistreated at the hands of the Turks. Now, when Turkey decided that it wanted to be part of the European Union, which is a good way to get a lot richer as a country, it gives you a lot more opportunities. All of a sudden, it was told that its human rights record had to be a lot better. And it did get better over the 20 years. So that's one possibility, and I'll just put that up there as a possibility, that something like NAFTA working with the Inter-American Court in the same way that the European Union works with the separate European Court possibly could be another model. It's not going to happen today. NAFTA is about business right now. But one of the things I'll be looking at over the next 10 years or so is whether we can imagine a NAFTA that wouldn't be just about business. So I'm always curious to hear opinions about that. And please come up to me afterward if you want to talk.
Okay, voy a hacer un resumen de las posiciones desde que intervino la doctora Norman. La doctora habla plantea un conflicto que parece ser evidente en la frontera norte entre los derechos ciudadanos de los americanos y los derechos humanos de los migrantes, generalmente entre mexicanos y centroamericanos. Y que mientras más se refuerzan los derechos de los ciudadanos, más débiles son los derechos humanos de los migrantes. Y que, pues bueno, por tener el derecho a proteger su espacio y a limitar el ingreso de migrantes, los derechos humanos de los americanos se vuelven muy fuertes y los derechos humanos de los mexicanos y centroamericanos se vuelven más débiles. Entonces la pregunta para el profesor Cabrera es si de alguna forma él había visto esta contradicción, y lo que responde es que de alguna forma los estados aceptaron que hubiera derechos humanos al término de la Segunda Guerra Mundial y por eso la Declaración de Derechos Humanos, pero que ciertamente hay un problema en términos de que el Estado que da los derechos humanos es el mismo que refuerza los derechos de los ciudadanos y debilita los derechos humanos. Entonces, que ciertamente mientras que no haya una entidad que no sea necesariamente estatal, parece que los derechos humanos pues no tienen una entrada fuerte o firme o constante o un estatus estable en esa medida. Can you repeat your answer just to see if I can make another precision on this point? What happens? The same state that gives the human rights after 1945 and the Declaration of Human Rights are the states that sometimes do not let through or do not fully respect these human rights because they are somehow conflicting with a citizen right.
I would say you've got to bind states and make it more possible for them to respect human rights. Now, this gentleman brings up a good point that sometimes the court might be at odds with what you think human rights are, and that's the risk we always take with courts. But in general, human rights protections would be a lot more secure if states were required to observe them.
Sí, que definitivamente se necesita más compromiso, más obligación de parte o sí, entenderlo como algo vinculante de parte de los estados de no simplemente dejar que imperen los derechos ciudadanos sobre los humanos, sino aceptar que los derechos humanos también necesitan respaldo y un respaldo que va más allá de lo que están acostumbrados a hacer.
And one last thing on this. Imagine a society in which you all got to decide how much you're going to pay in taxes, in which you all got to decide whether you were in the right when you got in a fight with someone or a car accident. You get to be the judge in your own case, whatever it is. Murder, you get to decide whether you go free or not, or the other person gets to decide. That's the world we live in. Every state, every country, 192 of them, claims the right to be the judge in its own case, right? And if it's powerful enough, it can, the country where I was born, the United States, often claims that right. If it's powerful enough, it can get away with things. This is the system, and I think, just to leave you with this is probably one of the biggest problems that we're facing, that we have 192 entities which get to judge whether they're right or not.
Sí, el doctor está ahora sí que mencionando una crítica típicamente cosmopolita del comportamiento de los estados, en el sentido de que los estados son, al mismo tiempo que son jueces, son parte en los casos que tienen que resolver sobre derechos humanos, y que generalmente sí sienten que tienen el poder para no necesariamente comprometerse con el derecho humano, van a estar respaldando otros derechos que tienen sus ciudadanos por encima de los derechos humanos, y que pues esa es una incongruencia de los estados, y que entre más poderosos son los estados, el compromiso con derechos humanos es más débil. Okay. Bueno, pues les agradecemos su presencia y su disposición a debatir y a preguntar. Y pues muchas gracias por venir. Estaremos contactándoles otra vez en algún otro momento para hablar sobre estos temas.